We're talking about sensation and perception. It's sensation and perception. You know what those things are. Why are you even here? Why am I explaining these things to you? Just kidding. We're going to talk about them. Get ready. So, sensation refers to when our senses receive some sort of input, right? It could be light for your eyes, it could be pressure on your hands if you're holding something, or the vibrations that are hitting your eardrums right now, allowing you to hear what I'm saying. These are senses. Now, what ends up happening is our brain takes that sensory input and then processes it. That is perception. So we're talking about how our brains and bodies receive that information, sensation, and then process and interpret that information, perception. There are four steps that get us to perception. The first is a physical stimulus. In order for you to sense something, it has to exist somewhere in the world. So if you're tasting a delicious piece of broccoli, that broccoli has to be there. If you're seeing your friend from across the room, your friend has to be there, unless they're a ghost. Then we have sensation, right? So the physical stimulus is there, it hits one of our sensory receptors. And then what happens is whatever sense that is, whether it's light or a molecule from food, our brains or our sensory receptors translate that information into information that our brains could later interpret. So light hits my retina. There are little rods and cones on the retina that respond to light, and that sends information through my optical nerve. So we take light energy, and now it's the biochemical energy of our neurons sending information to my occipital lobe, which my brain then processes, and that is perception, right? Or right now, I'm speaking into a microphone. That microphone is taking vibrations, creating an electrical signal, and then you, with your computer devices and your iPhones or your, iPads or whatever, that device is creating a vibration, which is a physical stimulus. That vibration hits your eardrum at some point, and by stimulating the eardrum, it stimulates little vibrating cilia, which will then create a transduced, biochemical signal. So the vibration becomes a signal that is sent to your brain, and then your brain interprets that information. So all of our senses work through the same four processes, but depending on which sense we're talking about, the actual physical stimulus is going to vary. So just because there is a physical stimulus doesn't necessarily mean that we will sense it. There's what's called an absolute threshold, which is basically the minimum amount of a physical stimulus that is needed for our senses to be able to perceive it. So, for example, if you happen to be drinking 2 gallons of water, which I don't recommend, that is a lot of water, but let's say somebody put in just a like half teaspoon of sugar in your 2 gallons of water, you wouldn't know that there was any sugar in your water. Even though there was, it wouldn't be enough for you to sense it. But once you get to at least a teaspoon of sugar in 2 gallons of water, you would be able to sense it, right? So with every sense that we have, there's a little bit that you need, right? And anything below that, you won't be able to sense. There's also the difference threshold, which is our ability to tell the difference between two very similar stimuli. The best example of this is the volume on your phone or your television. Have you ever done the thing where you turn it up just a little bit and you're wondering if you actually turned it up because you can't really tell the difference? So just one bar doesn't really do anything, but it does actually do anything. Our brains just have a hard time noticing that that something has changed. Also, sometimes what we experience is like if you've ever been shopping for like lipstick or like paint swatches, there are two colors that sometimes have very different names that for some reason look exactly the same. Some people might be able to tell the difference between the two, but other people might have a much harder time determining that one is different than the other. This is an example of the difference threshold. So, when we're talking about senses, you're probably familiar with the five main senses. Now, there are more senses than that. We'll talk about that in a second, but the five primary senses are vision, hearing, touch, smell, and taste. Now, we're going to break them down into two separate categories: physical senses and chemical senses. The reason why we differentiate them is because physical senses respond to energy, right? Vision responds to light, hearing responds to vibration, touch responds to kinetic energy like pressure, right? Chemical senses respond to actual matter. So, for example, when you're smelling something, little molecules from the thing that you're smelling actually enter your nose and set off your olfactory bulbs, which are responding to those little molecules of whatever it is you're smelling. Same thing with taste. If the thing isn't actually there, if the matter isn't present in your mouth, you can't taste it. It's not responding to energy, it's responding to actual physical things. So make sure that you know the difference between physical senses, vision, hearing, and touch, and chemical senses, smell and taste. Also, just in case you want to learn a fancy word to or two to impress your friends, smell can also be referred to as olfaction, and taste can be referred to as gustation. Just so you know, there are other senses. So there's hunger and thirst. Our bodies know when we are hungry or when we need more water. There's our ability to sense temperature when things are hot or cold. There's proprioception, which is our ability for us to know where our body is in relationship to itself in space. So, for example, if you wanted to clap your hands behind your back, you can do that without seeing where your hands are because you know where your hands are. That's proprioception. And then balance, right? That feeling of being upright or on balance or off balance, that's also a sense. And that comes from our inner ear, just in case you didn't know that. So, next thing that we're going to talk about is the gestalt, which is the idea that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So, just because you have all of the things that make something up doesn't necessarily mean that you have the thing. So, let's say you were in the desert, right? And you've been wandering for 3 days, your lips are dry, your skin is drier, right? And you just want some water. And you find somebody and you say, "Oh, give me water." And they give you three tanks of air, two containing hydrogen and one containing oxygen. Now, technically, right, they've given you water. They've given you all the parts that make up water. But you probably wouldn't be very grateful for what they gave you because water in its assembled form has more meaning than just the parts. So that's what we mean by the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Or if you think of like a your favorite band, right? Seeing one of them by like if you ran into one of them would be great, but hanging out with all of them together is completely different, right? So the whole, the identity that something has with all of its parts together is different and greater than that one thing or just any one part of that separate. So that's what the Gestalt is talking about. Now, how does this relate to sensation and perception? Well, when we're sensing things and when we're perceiving things, right, the things that we see or hear, they're just little pieces. But what our brains do is they make a meaningful whole out of them. The fun thing about this is even with limited information, our brains can make meaning out of that information. The weird thing that sometimes happens is that because our brain is making these assumptions, sometimes it gets things wrong. So we're going to see how our brain can be very clever, but we're also going to see how our brain can be tricked. So what do we see here? What you will probably say is that there are a whole bunch of triangles on the outside and they make a square, and then on the inside there is a diamond, right, made out of circles. Now you could say that there's one row with three triangles, one circle, three triangles, and another row with two triangles, three circles, two triangles, then a third row with one triangle, five circles, one triangle. But most people don't see it that way. The reason why is because our brains naturally group things by similarity, right? If you go to a sports game and you see one group of people on one side of the stadium with wearing specific colors, and you see another group of people wearing completely different colors, you're assuming that these two sides are representing two different teams because we naturally group things based off of similarity. So the reason why you see the triangles as one part of the image and the circles as the other part is because of similarity. Then we have proximity. These two images have the same number of circles, right? So over here, right, we have 6 by 6, 36 circles. And over here, we have 6 by 6, 36 circles. But a lot of people are going to see them as separate because of what's called proximity. The fact that there are these little separations between the three groups makes us go, oh, there must be one group and a second group and a third group. So when things are closer together, we tend to naturally group them. And then we have continuity. Continuity is super fun because what we should see is that there's one line and then there's a little curved line that crosses through them, right? Now, to some of these like color combinations might make it less likely that we see that. With this one, it looks like the line might be going like this, right? Or this way. But in general, we assume that lines and objects continue as if they normally would, right? So if I had, this pipe passing through the word continuity, you would assume that even though you can't see the rest of the pipe, that the pipe continues on, and I don't just have half of a pipe sticking out right here and just cuts off right there, and another half of the pipe hanging out right here, because we assume that things continue and don't just like drastically deter off from the way that they normally would. So our brains just assume that things operate in a very orderly way. This type of thing is not the way most things behave in nature. So we never assume that that's the way things should be. How many triangles are in this image? So one question is this a triangle, right? Is it? Or is it just like a little V right here, a little V right here, and a little V right here? Also, is this a triangle, right? Looks like it is a triangle because our brains naturally do what's called closure. Even though there might be these areas of things that we don't see, you go, oh, this is probably a circle. It's not a circle, but our brains assume that it is. So this could, these are separate things, probably, but you feel like this triangle is laying on top of everything. And also because of continuity, right? You're going to assume that there's a full. This is so perfectly drawn. Oh, I'm so good at this. I majored in art stuff. So with this one, we can see the ideas of closure and continuity. Another fun concept is the idea of the figure and ground. So, is this a picture of a vase, or is this two faces that are looking at one another, right? If you assume that the white is the background, right, then you focus on this vase in the middle because the white feels like the ground, the background, and the foreground seems like it is the figure, right? Now, you could look at it as this entire black area being the background, and then you could say that these are some faces with some very strangely shaped heads, right? And then the foreground are the faces, that's the figure, with the ground being the background. So our brains make sense of images, right? We focus on one thing or one aspect of something and determine that as the important thing to focus on. And if you know that brains do that, then you can do things like this to kind of mess with our perception. So get ready, sit down, because you're going to get your perception messed with. So I know that this is a video that you're watching, but this is not a video. This part is a still image. If you try to look at the white dots, you might notice that there are gray dots that are popping up in the periphery. The more you try to chase the little gray dots within the white dots, the more they seem to jump around. Now, if you don't trust me, pause the video. Are you back? Did you come back? Are you still here? Did you do it? Did you do the thing? I hope you did because it's real trippy if you do it. But our brains are trying to fill in information. And because of our brain's tendency to try to do that, we have these visual hallucinations. This is how illusions like this work. They take advantage of our brain's tendency to try to fill in the gaps. Again, you're not going to trust me, but if you look at the center or if you try to look at the background, it might feel like this image is moving. Again, feel free to pause. Welcome back. Did it move? It's weird, right? If you move your eyes left and right, Sometimes it will stay still for a second and then you'll relax your eyes and it'll start moving for a second. Trippy. Well, you've been fooled enough. We don't need to do any more. Okay, maybe just one more. This one doesn't always work for everyone, but if you kind of look away from it or you try to focus on one part of it, it feels like the rest of it is moving. When it's not, I promise you that it's not. I promise. This one is a classic one. Now, there is a woman in this photo. Can you find the woman? Now, some of you might have seen a younger woman facing away from the screen. I was going to say the camera. This is a painting, drawing, sketching. I don't know. Words are hard, right? Uh, or some of you might have seen an older woman facing kind of like profile, not profile. I don't, guys. I don't know what camera words are. I'm not a camera professor. I'm a psychology professor. If you know a lot about one thing, it excuses you to be ignorant about other things. Everybody knows that. So some people see one first and have trouble seeing the other. So let me show you the old woman. So this is the bottom of her face, this is her chin. She's got her mouth right here. And then she's got a big nose, but there's nothing wrong with that. Everybody is beautiful. The little nose is just like a cool little wart. This is her eye. Oh, hi there, right? And this is her cool old lady cape. And she's got hair right here and the rest of her hat, right? So this is the old lady. Oh, hi there. So if you're having trouble seeing the young woman, this nose that I was paying or drawing your attention to earlier is actually her jaw, right? And this is her face, and you see a little eyelash right here. And there's her nose, and she's facing away. And this is her neck, and she's got a cool necklace. Maybe it's got some like pearls or something. And this is her cool hair, very curly, right? So she's facing away from the camera. So I'm just gonna give us some real cool eyebrows. So this is again taking advantage of the fact that we focus on specific things and we ignore other things. This is how our brains work. Are you guys sick of illusions yet? I remember when I was like, oh, we're not going to do anymore, and then I totally did. I don't care. This is fun for me. I hope it's fun for you. This first one between these two, which line is longer? I'll let you think on that. It's pretty obvious that these lines are actually the same length, right? Feel free to pause that and draw your own lines on your phone if you want to. I'm not responsible for damaged phones. Also, these two lines over here, also the same length. These lines right here, the same length, right? Very hard to draw straight lines on a computer, by the way. There's no circle here. It just feels like there should be, right? These two circles, obviously one is bigger than the other. Note they are also, ooh, that's not a great, that wasn't a great straight line. I'm so sorry. They're also the exact same length. So if you ever go to a restaurant that has very small plates, it's because they're trying to make you feel like you're getting a lot more food, right? Same thing right here. Obviously, this one is so much bigger than this one. Nope. We make judgments based off of comparison. So even though it seems like this one is so much bigger than this one, it's just because our brains are making assumptions based off of the information that we see that contextualizes these two. So you can't trust your senses. Just in case you didn't know that, you definitely cannot. So just one last concept for you regarding sensation perception. There are two ways that we process information. We have our bottom up and top down. Now, bottom up processing is based off of the what we get when we actually get that sensory information. So if you walk into somewhere and you see this, right, you know that there's a line right here, a line right here, a line right here, a line right here, and these four lines connect at 90-degree angles, right? And then your brain, by looking at all of this information, goes, I see a square. Now, that takes a little bit of time to do in order to look at everything and be able to digest all parts of it, assemble it mentally, and make a judgment about what it is. If you've noticed, right, you, as soon as you saw that, knew what it was. Now, part of that is because your brain makes assumptions, right? When you go into places, you kind of have an idea of what you're going to see. So if you walk into a classroom and you see a person, you already assume this person's waving hi. So you assume that you're going to see another student with their cool student hair. So because you've made that assumption, your brain already gets ready to process that information. You see shapes near a desk, then you go, oh, that's probably a person, right? That's top-down processing. A lot of our processing is top-down, where we walk into a situation, I say, okay, guys, I'm about to show you a whole bunch of squares, right? And then you think that everything that you see is going to be a square. Even though some of those are rectangles, you just perceive them as squares because that's what our brains do. And then later you go, wait a second, that one that's about to disappear, that was definitely a rectangle. Because after you've made these assumptions, these top-down assumptions, you're still getting information from your senses. So our top-down processing allows us to make these quick judgments about what we're going to see in the world so that we're not walking in blind to any situations. We kind of know what to expect, but then our bottom up processing fills in the gaps and makes corrections as necessary. And that is sensation and perception. Have fun. Bye.